Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review Five Nights at Freddy's 2. And this sequel, this horror slasher flick, comes to you from director Emma Tammy and written by Scott Cawthon. And this film stars Josh Hutcherson again as Mike, with his sister Abby, played by Piper Rubio, with Elizabeth Lail back as Vanessa, and they're all dealing with the aftermath of their experiences at Freddy's, with Matthew Lillard's William Afton just looming over them. And now there's a new threat, and this marionette that is trying to control these animatronics and luring Abby in for nefarious purposes. And this film is a lot shorter and moves a lot better than the first film, which, I don't know, that first film felt way longer than 5 minutes longer than this film. I will give this credit that I guess it doesn't have to do tons of setup, but there are some big chunks towards the beginning where I think the pacing's a little choppy in the first act, because it's like big setup scene, long setup scene, and then it gets into gear and it's just going. And honestly, to a bit of a detriment though, because after a while it's like rushing through things, and tonally this has very obnoxious jump scares for sure. It has some good laughs sprinkled in there, but it's never funny enough, it's never fun enough, and it's also never scary enough. It just lives in this liminal space of just, it's kind of okay in both of those dimensions, and never enough where this is like a legitimately scary movie or like a really fun horror comedy. And it just lives in that space that's kind of frustrating, because it never really digs deep enough into either of these genres to really make it worthwhile in either way. Then you have, like, the visuals are, like, there's some interesting shots, there's some shocking moments, but in general, it's kind of bare. And then you get into the writing. And this is where this film really is challenging, because, first off, which I liked Mike and his journey in the first film, I think, more than most people, but without that, it's really obvious how bland of a character he is, and he's frustratingly so here. And all of his decisions are the most blunt and most, like, there's no nuance to it, and it gets frustrating in that way. I think Vanessa's probably the most interesting character here, or still processing, but, you know, there's all these other layers, and there's so much extra just world building that's smashed into this sequel that's an hour and 45 minutes. And it half-heartedly injects story threads, it builds up conflicts that feel so anticlimactic, and then it adds in these other twists and turns and layers that feel unfulfilled, and then it really screeches to a halt at the end, where it's just like, is this next movie going to pick up right where this left off? Because it kind of has to. Where it's just, this doesn't, it kind of felt like a part one to a story, and you're like, this didn't feel satisfying at all. And there's tons of horrible logic jumps throughout this whole entire film, trying to piece this together. And like I said, there's some funny moments, there's some fun writing moments, and sure, there's some moody bits and stuff like that. But in general, this is such a clunky film that's just trying way too hard to throw all of these elements at you, and it overwhelms you with them to the point where it's like, is this just setting up for the next movie? And we're going straight into the next movie, and this doesn't feel like its own experience? Because that's really how it felt by the end. And then performance-wise, Josh Hutcherson's very flat. I think Elizabeth Lail, does a fine job. Matthew Lillard pops up in certain ways, and, you know, he's hamming it the hell up. Even have, like, Wayne Knight, who's, like, the science teacher at the school that Abby goes to, and, you know, he's a jerk, he has some fun. They really waste McKenna Grace, who pops up in here for a little bit. And there's also one special little cameo that you might appreciate that is a nice nod to another horror franchise that Matthew Lillard's a part of. But in general, nothing about this movie really stands out in an interesting or engaging way. And then it kind of just feels like a bridge to another story and a bigger story. And it just ends. It, like, just ends. And you're just like, what was the point of this? And there's little bits of closure and connection to the first film that feels shoehorned in there because you need to feel like this has that emotional connection for this journey. But there's some intermittent fun shenanigans. It does have a little bit to say about society, that there's, like, this Freddy fest going on because people are nostalgic about it despite the fact that, like, kids were murdered. You know, just forget about that. But in general, this is a pretty frustrating experience and a huge letdown. And, like, if you're really into Five Nights at Freddy's, I'm sure you'll have a good time. But, like, for others who are trying to build a connection to this through these films, this one is not doing it. But those are my thoughts on Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Let me know what you think, and let's talk some movies. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.